All right, everybody, my name's Harold. I'm an alcoholic, and great to be with you tonight from the big state of Big Mo, Missouri, or that's what we call it, as Big Mo, the Show Me State. My sobriety date's April 7th, 1987, so just a couple of days ago, I celebrated 34 years of continuous sobriety. That's awesome as well, and so I'm grateful to be able to share that with you tonight. My home group is in St. Louis. I live just outside of St. Louis City. My home group is called AA on the Rocks, and we meet on Wednesday nights. And we just went back live last Wednesday, and it was a glorious time and a glorious celebration. So wherever you're at around the country, when you get the privilege to be able to go back live, and even though it was really limited because of CDC regulations, it was still great to be with your homies and a lot of other people. And we're virtual. We're hybrid, so we had a big Zoom presence, but as well as in-house meeting as well. So it was great. It was kind of like being in a meeting with handcuffs. It's kind of like sitting in a meeting with handcuffs when you can't, really, hug and do all that stuff. I know when this stuff's all over, we're just going to have one hell of a mass burning party. We'll do a lot of hugging and smooching, I guess, when that time happens. But looking forward to that. I come from a great line of sponsorship. My sponsor most of my sobriety was Tom I from North Carolina. Many of you been around long enough to know Tom, or you've probably heard some of his tapes. Tom, unfortunately, he suffers from Alzheimer's illness and is in a nursing home in North Carolina today. So he hasn't been able to be in a position to sponsor anybody for several years now. So when that happened, Steve L. from Nashville agreed to walk this journey with me. So we've been walking that journey together. I'm current with him, and it's been mentioned, we as a sponsorship pack, we're together each week or most weeks. And so it's a good journey. And so I say that is because I come from a great lineage of sponsorship, because it's made a huge difference in how my life's turned out. And so I just want to make that and share it. And so I think having solid sponsorship and being part of a strong three legacy group are imperative for, long-term sobriety and joyful sobriety, and we read the steps tonight. And if you read the forward into 12 and 12, it tells us that 12 steps, and I'm paraphrasing, but there's a group of principles, spiritual in nature, which if practiced or adopted, as I would say, is a way of life, and you lived into, that they will expel the compulsion to drink and lead to a life where you become happy and usefully whole. And that's a huge promise. And I think it's a great definition of what the fellowship's all about. It's more than just not drinking. And that's what I looked at sobriety. That's the definition of what I would have gave it when I first got here. It means that we're not going to drink anymore, which means that's not good, because I love to drink. And so we'll talk about that. I don't have a long time to talk, but I will dive right into it. And the things that I'll lift up in the next 30 minutes are really, I'm just going to center on what I call the 5 big delusions of alcoholism. There's many more than that, and there's sub parts to this, but I just call them the big 5, because these are really the big 5 things that in my sobriety that I really had to wrestle through or work through to have the life I have today. And I think most alcoholics share these delusions in some capacity or another, at some varying degrees and varying levels. So I'll share those with you, and then I'll weave my story as we do that. And I think it'll be a fair share. And I think it's on page 105 of Bill Sees It. There's an excerpt from one of his letters, and the top of that page, I think it's titled, if I remember right, it's titled Chief Responsibility. And it goes on to say that our chief responsibility is to deliver an adequate demonstration of Alcoholics Anonymous, whether that's us as individuals or groups or districts or area or A as a whole. And so I know that's happening tonight. But if you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous, or you're on here just trying to find your way, maybe you're coming back after been drinking for a while, or you're just in a rut in your sobriety, or you don't know what's going on. Hey, wherever you're at on your spiritual journey, your recovery journey, I just personally want to welcome you to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I hope that you can find what you're looking for here. If you're wanting to stop drinking and you're truly alcoholic, then this is a great way to live, and it's a great solution for King Alcohol. So my number's in my name tag there, and I put it there for a reason. So you're more than welcome to contact me or reach out to me after the fact if I can ever be of service to you in any way. If you ever come to Big Mo, come to St. Louis or whatever, we'd love to see you, but we also love to put you to work. We'll probably, if you give us enough advance, I'll put you to work doing something in recovery, in our town. So with that, let's dive in. I was introduced to AA in 1979. That's in the Department of Corrections. I came to the Department of Corrections. Both times that I found my way into recovery came through that system. I was in a county jail in a detention center called Adair County Detention Center, where I was held over. I just got released from a juvenile penitentiary system, and I was already arrested on another charge. And I was there I was in a holding cell waiting to be arraigned on another charge. And it was there that they brought an AA meeting in, and I was introduced to AA for the first time in 1979. Now, I didn't have any desire to stop drinking, nor did I think I was alcoholic, but I was, I had to go to the meeting. It was part of it. And I was there, and, so a seed was planted. Whether I wanted it to be planted or not, the information was given to me and a seed was planted. Part of that plea bargain when I got out was that I either had to with this charge, I could either go back and spend 2.5 more years on the same sentence, or I could in a parole violation, or I could go do 30 days in a treatment center. Well, I quit school when I was 13, but I knew that 30 days was a heck of a lot shorter than 2.5 years. So I chose to go to the treatment center. And that was my first introduction to any treatment. I was 15 years old, going on 16. And so I was introduced to AA, not only on the streets inside a treatment center, but also on the outside. They took us to outside meetings, et cetera. And that's how I came into my introduction to you people. I didn't want anything you had to offer me at that time. But later, when I finally surrendered and asked God to come into my life, you were the first people I came running back to. And I've been here ever since. But I call them the 5 big delusions because delusion number 1 is I'm not alcoholic. And that delusion, unfortunately, kills most of us. We're up against the illness. We were talking about it before the meeting started with COVID and how it's impacted. It's impacted everybody in the whole world. Over 2 million people have lost their lives to this stuff. And it's a wicked, wicked, wicked thing. But the reality is, based on numbers and guesstimates, that there'll be close to 3.5 million people that will die from alcoholism this year and throughout the world. And that's a pandemic in itself, although it doesn't affect everybody, so it doesn't get that definition. But it does validate just how powerful this illness is. And most people that have alcoholism in the States, we got roughly 15 million alcoholics, that they are aware of in the States, and less than 10% of those will ever seek help for the illness of alcoholism. And as our book would say on page 30, that in the first 3 words, great big bold letters, most of us are unwilling to admit that we're real alcoholics. And that delusion is so powerful that it takes us to the gates of insanity or death. And in my experience, most people that have alcoholism will go on to the gates of insanity and eventually death. That's how ugly of an illness it is. And it's an illness that says I don't have one. And that's the cunning, baffling, powerful nature of it. That's the delusional part of it, is that I don't see myself for what I really am. And that delusion itself did everything but kill me. I started drinking when I was young. Wasn't even a teenager yet when I was introduced to King Alcohol. The effect it had on my life changed my life immediately. It was an apocalyptic event. The euphoric effect that the juice had on my life was just amazing. It was apocalyptic. It's something that's been unveiled for you that you never experienced before. And that's what King Alcohol did for me. It just changed my whole life. And I didn't become an everyday drinker. Matter of fact, the first time I really got intoxicated, I knew I was going to do this for the rest of my life, but I also got as sick as I've ever been off alcohol. I probably said my first alcoholic plea bargain prayer that night. I probably lied about my condition that night to my mother. And I didn't drink the next day, next week, maybe even next month. But what the effect and the lifestyle that was introduced to me that night was, like I said, it was apocalyptic. It was transformative. It was a revelation. And it was something that would alter my course for the rest of my life. And so it wasn't just the effect alcohol had on me physically, but it was just the attraction to the whole thing. And so I gave my life to it. And being a youngster and not really being able to live that life financially, I fell into crime and started doing burglaries and a lot of petty crimes and bigger crimes. And that's what landed me into the penal system. And really the Department of Corrections had its teeth in me all the way well into sobriety. And I paid, dearly for some of the stuff, even in sobriety, for what happened in my past. And so I don't know if we'll have time for all that, but I'll share some of that eventually. But But that's what happened. I left home when I was 13. I mean, I quit school when I was 13. I left home when I was 15 for good. And I hooked up after I got out of that treatment center in 1980. I hooked up with the drifter who was I was living in northern Missouri. There was a drifter in town. His name was Scott. Scott was probably 45 or so. Big, tall guy, about 6'4", 6'5", big, thin guy, long hair, had hair down to his buttocks, had an old UPS van that he turned into a living quarters. It was just really his mobile little RV. But he was just a hippie partier, and he was just drifting around, and he just happened to be in the town I was in northern Missouri. And I bumped into him a handful of times, and we became, drinking buddies. And he was on his way back to Austin, Texas. And I said, hey, do you think I could go back to Texas with you? And he said, if you can get the green light from probation and parole and others, you can go. And I got the green light. And so off I went with this guy. I didn't even hardly know. I went to just get old enough to drive a car. And off I took with Scotty, and we went down south. And for the next 5 years, I lived all over the South. In Tennessee, I lived in Chattanooga. I lived in Knoxville for a while. I lived in Texas, a couple different places in Texas, Austin for starters. And then I ended up in Georgia, Ackworth, Georgia, just over the Tennessee line and before you get to Atlanta. That's about the simplest way I can tell you. And it would be in Ackworth, Georgia, that I would have my first concession with King Alcohol. It would be the first time that I would concede that there was any, that I was getting tired of this life. And I was 19. I was a blackout drinker from day one. I was living in an old beat-up trailer park called Red Barn Trailer Court. I lived with my buddy Mike and Danny. Nobody had a car. Nobody had a license. We were all on parole. Probably had warrants for our arrest. Lived in a beat-up old trailer park with a bunch of rejects from the South. So we had rejects from every state but the state of Georgia on our street. I mean, from Kentucky and North Carolina, Tennessee, all over the place. How bad was it? Well, I lived next door to three guys named Pork Chop, Hollywood, and Screwdriver. That should give you a real good idea how life was going, at that point in time in my life. But I was a blackout drinker. I was a heavy bar drinker. I loved the saloons. You could call me a saloonitic because I loved to go to the honky tonks long before they were really popular, being called honky tonks, I guess. But I loved it. And I love country girls, especially in white T-tops, tight jeans, cowboy boots. If you had a cowboy hat and a four-wheel drive, even better. I loved that stuff. And I couldn't stay out of those honky tonks. But the problem was I was alcoholic, number one. Number two, I was rowdy and I had a big mouth. And if I was drinking whiskey or mixing it with something else, heard a good chance somebody wanted to jack me once, before the night was out. I had that gift. Maybe some of you had that gift. I definitely had that gift. And this particular night, I woke up on a Saturday morning and I was fully dressed. It was wintertime. I had my boots on, blue jeans, and I had a flannel shirt and I had a sawed-off base jacket on. And I woke up with a big tomato head in the middle of my trailer floor. And I was hung over to the max. And as I woke up and got my wits, I realized I had blood all over my hands. I had it all over my jacket, and I had no idea what had happened to me, which was not uncommon because I was a blackout drinker. I figured somebody just kicked the dog snot nasty out of me, and I got up and went to the bathroom, and I started to look from where I was bleeding. As I got undressed, I realized somebody had sliced me all the way around my arm and had stabbed me in my rib cage. And so, of course, I freaked out, and I went out and sat down on the front of the trailer. But it was the first time, friends, ever that I can remember ever in my run with alcohol, which had been about 8 years at this point in that life, in the hard life, that I ever really got emotional about my life. I got emotional about my powerlessness over alcohol, and I knew that I was powerless over alcohol. And it was the first time that I ever, almost audibly said, man, I got to do something different than what I'm doing. And I had tears in my eyes. I was very emotional. And here's the problem with the delusion of alcoholism, because, we throw this word denial around, but it's only mentioned twice in the big book, once on page 10 and Bill's story, once in the spiritual appendix. And both times it's talking about denying a power greater than ourselves. When our book talks about the illness, it talks about it on the basis of delusion and illusion. I can't see myself for what I really am, and I can't differentiate the truth from the false. And that's the hardcore facts about alcoholism. And so if you're here tonight and you're new or coming back or whatever, and you have some sobriety, even if it's only a few hours or just a few days, I hope all of us can hang on to that and cherish it for what it is. It's a prized possession. And man, if it slips through our fingers, there's no guarantee that we'll ever get it back. So we need to do anything to as we would say to the newcomer, are you willing to go to any lengths to have victory over it? And I hope that you are. At that point, I wasn't. And I didn't have any information. There was nothing between me and King Alcohol, and there's nothing between you and it, whatever it is in your life. In this case, it happened to be alcohol. If there's nothing between you and it, and you're powerless, well, you're going to succumb to whatever it is every single time. And so there was nothing between me and it. And so I sat on the front porch of that trailer, and I'm very emotional. I'm thinking to myself, man, I got to do something different than what I'm doing. But it was just like King Alcohol was sitting right next to me with his arm around me, consoling me. I call King Alcohol the great compromiser. And he don't even care if you go to these meetings, or even if you own a big book, as long as you don't live into this deal. And so King Alcohol is there with me, and I'm mumbling stuff like, man, I got to do something different than I'm doing. And this is what King Alcohol basically said to me. You know what, kid, you're right. You do need to do something different. But before you do anything drastic, walk in here and grab your old Army jacket, and let's walk up here to the Magic Market and get a quart of beer and a pack of smokes. And as dark and as broken and as sick as that sounds, that was a very refreshing voice in this broken little mind at that time. Very comforting. I walked in, I got the old Army jacket. I didn't even wash the blood off my hands. And I started my journey up to the Magic Market. And that sense of ease and comfort came over me before I ever got there. I was already feeling better before I ever got a drink in my hand. I walk into the Magic Market, I get the quart of beer, I get the pack of smokes, I come out, I twist that top off and make that noise we all like. You know, that little I Dream of Jeannie popped out of the bottle. And I took that thing back and I made a big old pull off it, and I make that face that we make. And I said it let out a big exhale. And that was the last time I thought about not drinking for a long time. And that's alcoholism. That's the nature of the beast. That's the delusional part of all this stuff. I hitchhiked in Marietta, Georgia. I got sewed up, and that would be the last time I would think about not drinking for a long time. And the crux of that insanity is it's just embedded in delusion. Not able to see myself what I really am, or what I really was, or what all the evidence says that I was. I just couldn't see it. And I made my way back to St. Louis. My bottom in St. Louis came 1985. I moved back to St. Louis, and I got arrested for a 4 DWI conviction. This was going into 1987. A few weeks later, I've been a drummer my whole life. I started playing drums and percussion when I was about 5, and was gifted at it, and it served me well, especially during my youth and my drinking years. And I was playing in a rock and roll gig over across the river in East St. Louis with other bandmates, and we were coming home that night. I was in the back seat of the car as a passenger, I was in the back seat on the passenger side, and there's 4 of us in the car, and we're coming home, and it's late at night. It's probably 2 or 3 in the morning. We're 10 sheets in the wind after been playing music and drinking all night, and a spotlight hits our car and pulls us over on the side of the shoulder. And we sat there for a long time. Nothing happened. We were all freaking out, wondering what was going on. Eventually the spotlight goes out, and it was just a truckload of knuckleheads with a spotlight on their truck messing with us. And so we end up in a high-speed chase with them coming back to St. Louis, and it went on for a good while. They were in a fast lane, and they'd swerve at us, and we'd swerve at them, and this went back and forth. And eventually, unfortunately, going really fast, they were in the fast lane. They just, when they swerved at us, they swerved it back, and when they did, they hit it too hard, and it just shot their truck like a bottle rocket right up over the embankment, and it flipped countless times all the way down to when it finally came to a rest, and unfortunately it destroyed the truck and killed everybody inside the vehicle. And so we didn't get home from that whole event until wee hours the next morning. It was well after daylight. And when I got dropped off and walked into my little apartment, you know, I was absolutely crushed. I was just absolutely crushed. It was like somebody took out a piece of my soul and just whacked it off. And I sat there just a broken human being. But there was nothing between me and it happened to be King Alcohol. So within literally minutes, you know, I've already succumbed to the desire, this delusional idea that I can drink and it's going to make it better. And I'm drinking again after I just come home from a fatality drunk driving accident, only to be behind the wheel of a car less than 2 weeks later to be arrested for a 50 WI, which happened to be 4th felonies for me, 4th and 50 WIs, parole violation. I'm 21 going on 22, and I'm on my way back to the penitentiary. And they had me isolated in a drunk tank by myself. I weighed about 140 pounds. I'm in my underwear in this drunk tank. And it was in that drunk tank that I said the most honest prayer I've ever said in my life. And it was simply 3 words. I've heard it a million times from podiums in AA, but it was simply 3 words. God help me. And the only difference between that prayer and all the other ones that I'd ever said in a plea bargain moment words is that the word honesty was connected to it. And I love how in our book there it says that God doesn't make too hard of turns for those who honestly seek him. And this was the first time that I honestly ever sought God for out of pure surrender and desperation. And as Bill Wilson would write in his own story, that God's impact on his life was sudden and profound, but for most people it comes gradually. And I'm paraphrasing loosely, but that's what I would have said for well over a decade, that God's impact in my life was a gradual thing. It just took time. But one day while we were sitting in prison doing an AA workshop, and we were going through Bill's story, and we ran across that paragraph where Bill said that God's impact on his life was sudden and profound. It finally dawned on me after all these years that God's impact on my life was sudden and profound, because the minute I honestly asked God to come into my life, I've never had another drink of alcohol from that moment till I sit here tonight, 34 years later. And friends, that is sudden and that is profound. I didn't wake up to that truth for well over a decade, but that's the impact of this power greater than ourselves that we talk so much about here in AA. And so I bonded out, and I went back to that treatment center that I was at in 1980, only it had changed names by this time. And I went there not to go to AA, really not to pursue recovery. I went there for a piece of paper because I had a huge trial coming up that I knew I was going back to the penitentiary. The question was for how long? And so that's all I was concerned. It consumed me. That's all I cared about. So I went there to do my time, in the treatment center. And that's how I really approached it. Every time I was in treatment, it was about doing time. I'm going to do my time, get my paper, come back, go to court, and hope for the best. And I spent my time there. And but what happened there was beautiful, and I don't have time to get into it, but I got 12-step by a guy there. His name was Gary. He only had 2.5 months of sobriety. He was the age I am now. He was 55. And Gary found his way into my room. He's just not less than 90 days sober, but he was there to take people to outside meetings. And he asked me if I wanted to go. I told him no. I wasn't interested at all. And just politely asked him to leave, and he left. And then he come back and he did something beautiful. He walked back just a few minutes later to open my door, but he just stuck his head in. That was the only part he stuck in. He smiled real hard. He said, "Well, do me a favor." I said, "What's that?" He goes, "I want you to try really hard to smile and get it over with." And then he left. And I thought, well, what the hell does that mean? Smile and get it over with. But the next thing I know, I got this willingness that came out of nowhere to get up. And I got up, and the next thing I know, I'm scouring the halls looking for this guy. And I finally found him. I said, hey, are you still going to that AA meeting? He said, yeah. And I said, well, that's good. He said, why is that good? And I said, because I want to go. And he goes, well, that's good. And I said, well, why is that good? And he goes, because I can't get anybody else to go with me. And then I knew I was followed the hook in. I'm like, what did I just get into? Now that I just followed it. And I said, all right, well, I guess we're going. And off we went. And we walked down to his car, and he had a newcomer car. We could pass the basket tonight and easily pay for it. I mean, it was a 1970 pea green Plymouth Duster. Had no floorboards in it, had floor mats, but they were rusted out. He had no exhaust on his car. He had trash everywhere. He had a hot wired stereo in it. He had old RCA home speakers in the back seat. And he had a grin that wrapped all the way around his face because he had a new guy he was going to show up at the meeting with. So he was like on fire. And we get into that car, and he cranks that thing up with no exhaust on it. Whom, 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 whom. And off we go through this little town of 10,000, Kirksville, Missouri, right down through the heart of the city to where all the churches are at. And carbon monoxide's pouring through the thing. You're trying not to die from asphyxiation. He's got a grin that wraps around his face. He's got the new guy in the car. He's giving me the AA pitch. He's firing on me as fast as he can fire, trying to tell me how great his life is now that he's not drinking anymore. And I'm looking at his car, which was held together by duct tape, and I'm looking at him. He's got prison-issue glasses, and he looks like hell. And I'm thinking to myself, dude, it don't look like you got much going on at all. That's what I pretty much communicate to him. And he laughs at it, but he's quick. He goes, well, tell me about your car, because I'm making fun of his. Well, I don't even have a car. And of course, he's busting my chops on that. He goes, and rumor has it, you got a big trial coming up. How's that going for you? So he just starts needling me, with the reality of my life. But we get to the meeting, and he said, man, when we go in here, I just need you to be Harold the alcoholic. And if they call on you, let's hope they don't. But if they would call on you, all you do is say you're Harold, you're alcoholic. You don't have to say you're Harold, an alcoholic in an attic or a this or that. He says, Harold, when you say alcoholic, it's got a broad definition. We know what that means. I mean, he probably even slept with a few farm animals because you're a country boy. We get all of that. I mean, it has a huge definition. So just be Harold the alcoholic. I said, yes, sir, Harold the alcoholic. So I've been Harold the alcoholic ever since I've been to AA, and I started my journey. Unfortunately, I didn't want to go to AA. It didn't really appeal to me even after that meeting. I came back to St. Louis, and thank God I had this persistent guy in my life, this guy, Gary, who pursued me even once I got back to St. Louis. And I didn't go to AA. It would be over 90 days before I ever, or up close to 90 days before I ever make it to AA. And it was only because of his persistent pursuing me. I was really at that place, and I know many of you have been there, and some of you may be there tonight, where you stood at that place and you could not picture life without alcohol in it. And I just couldn't. I lived my whole life. I'd give everything I had to live this life. And it was all I knew. I played music in it. I lived in it. I loved the honky tonks. It was everything all my entire identity was in this lifestyle. And I could not see myself not living that lifestyle. And I had a lot of great times drinking. And I loved the effect alcohol had on my life. And so, I just cannot picture my life without it. At the same time, as our literature would clearly say, I couldn't picture my life if I continued with it, because I knew I would spend the rest of my life incarcerated or that I would die from it. And so I was really at that crossroads. I was at that turning point. I was in a bad situation, and I was scared to death, and I felt like I was on an island all by myself, and I didn't know what to do. I mean, I drifted back to the bars. I drifted back to the same honky tonks that I hung out with, trying to play pool, trying to drink Coca-Cola, trying to fit in, and had enough wherewithal and enough desire not to drink that I knew that if I stayed there, I was going to get drunk, and I left. But it was because of that persistent friend that I went to AA. And so if there's a message tonight to any of us, it's that we always got to remember that it was Ebby who called Bill, it was Bill who called Bob, and it was Gary who called Harold. And that's why I'm here tonight. And I think today it's real easy to get caught up and drive through AA and, hey, welcome to AA. Can I take your order? If I reach out to you, you're there to help me. But if I'm just left for me to figure my way out, there's not a lot of people picking up the phone and calling people as much as there used to be. I'm forever grateful, because I guarantee you I would have never went to AA had it not been for that persistent friend 200 miles away. And I chickened out the first time, but I finally went to my first AA meeting. But I came to AA the same way I did everything else in my life, friends. I'm going to do it how I want, when I want, the way I want. And if you don't like it, too bad, because that's how I'm doing it. I lived my whole life like that. And so I came to AA, and I didn't want a sponsor right off the bat. I had a probation and parole officer since I was 11 years old. No thanks. I still had one. I don't need somebody else speaking into my life, tell me what to do, when to do it, how to do it. No, thank you. I mean, it had no appeal to me whatsoever. And the steps didn't attract me, because I didn't think the steps would change my life. Is the bottom line. And I had such a worldly reliant worldview on how my life was going to become happy, joyous, and free. And it didn't embark the spiritual side of things. It was all about the world. Call me crazy, but I think I could be a little bit more happy, joyous, and free if I had a few $100s in my pocket. Call me crazy, but that made sense to me. If I had a legal driver's license and a car I could legally drive, and a better looking girl, or a girl at all, call me crazy, but I think I could be a little bit more happy, joyous, and free. That's what motivated my life. When I get that, then I'm going to be happy, joyous, and free. I call it worldly mathematics, but that's what it was. And it's delusional. It's what our world lives in. It's this very individualistic and consumeristic mindset that once I have more stuff, whatever stuff is, that somehow or another I'm going to be happy, joyous, and free. That's a delusion in itself. I mean, it tells us that on page 61 that we're under the delusion that we can wrest satisfaction out of this world if we can only manage it well. And boy, I was swallowed that hook. I was way under that delusion. And so that's what my motivator was here for. It wasn't about steps or anything. So I fell in love with you people. I really did right off the bat. I fell in love with Alcoholics Anonymous. I fell in love with the people. I had a sober band called Alliance. We played all kinds of sober gigs. I played on sober softball teams, went to sober float trips, dated sober girls, did all the sober stuff. Loved it all. You see me all over the place. You think I was on fire for this stuff, but I was on step none the whole time. You could argue I was on 0.5. I had a desire not to drink, but I hadn't lived into anything else. And so you can only run that gamut for so long. And eventually you're going to implode. And so that lasted 3 years for me. I finally came, and I call it coming to the end of yourself, because that's ultimately what had to happen. I had to come to the end of myself. And that happened at 3 years of sobriety. And I asked this guy, Roy, to sponsor me. Roy had knew me the whole time. And I said, and I finally was in enough pain, and my life was in enough jams that I finally surrendered. And I said, Roy, will you sponsor me? He says, just come over to the house. And I went over to this house. He says, Harold, you've been around almost 3 years. Tell me about your life. And I said, I'll tell you about my life, Roy. I said, I'm 3 years sober. I'm going on 25 years of age. I live in a basement of a house. I don't have any education. I don't even have a GED. I got a criminal record. I don't have a driver's license. I never had a driver's license. I don't know if I'll ever have a driver's license. I got a piece of crap car that's held together by 8 different stickers that I can't legally drive, but I do. My life sucks, brother. I've been just take the word sucks, put it in all cap letters, underline it, highlight it, bold it, put Christmas lights around it, and flash it. Sucks, sucks, sucks. That's where my life was at after 3 years, and I hadn't drank in 3 years. And so he listened to all that, and he listened to my story. And after he got done, he was very sweet. He was very loving. He was very graceful. He said, Harold, I hear everything you're saying, and there is no doubt that you've been dealt a really tough hand in your life. But man, I hope you're going to hear what I'm going to tell you. And friends, what he told me that night changed my life. And it's as true that night as it is as I sit here with you tonight. And this is what he said to me. He said, Harold, I hope you're going to hear what I'm going to tell you. But every single thing you have in your life right now, you've attracted to you by the person that you've become. And the day you're man enough to own that is the day you're on your way to some real change. But until you can own that, this little vicious cycle you're on, you're going to eventually drink again because you're not happy about your sobriety. Or you're going to do what my dad did. My dad, unfortunately, stuck a shotgun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. That's how my dad quit drinking. But to continue on the path that you're going, it's not an option anymore. So you're going to do one or two things. You're either going to grow or you're going to go. And the $1 million question is, what do you want to do? And I didn't want to go. I mean, I loved you people. I absolutely loved it. Hey, my life had centered around this thing. But I knew you were going to say, let's work the steps. And the reality was I didn't believe the steps would change my life. You know, the late Clancy, God rest his soul, but Clancy used to say all the time that the hardest thing that any of us will ever do is to take actions that we don't believe in. And friends, that's been my experience. And it's the hardest thing we'll ever do as sponsors, as sponsoring other people and leading people on this journey, is to get them to take actions that they don't believe in. I just didn't believe the spiritual mathematics of this thing. The spiritual mathematics are given to us on page 64 when it says when we put the spiritual ahead of the material, we straighten out physically, we straighten out mentally. You can just go ahead and add emotionally and spiritually and all the other stuff along with it. We just finally straighten out when we get the mathematics right. But I've been living by worldly mathematics my whole life. And I just had the mathematics wrong. I really believe when I had the stuff that I mentioned earlier that I would be happy, joyous, and free, but it's not true. But I really believed it. And so, but I was desperate. I had to come to the end of myself. And all these years I've been sober, and I've sponsored lots of people during that time over the years. What I've learned is that I have really not met anybody that's really lived into this design for living that we have, with everything that they have, that's came all the way in, sit all the way down and stayed here until their life depended on it. And I was finally at a place where my life depended on it. And I knew it. And I didn't need anybody to sell me on it. And so I started this journey in the steps. And my life didn't explode into change. It didn't happen in one big cataclysmic explosion, but little by little, my life started to take off. And the mathematics kicked in. What are the mathematics? Well, spiritual mathematics means 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4. It means it's the world, it's that realm of the spirit, the world of the spirit, as we would call it, where the impossible becomes possible. And friends, that's what I'm telling you. So I don't know where you're at on your journey. I don't know where you came from or what you got going on or what you think is an impossible mountain to climb. But I'm telling you, in the world of the spirit, where the spiritual mathematics exists, that it's true when I say that 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4. And the impossible become impossible. So I started that journey, and it transformed my life. And again, it didn't happen in one big explosion, but it took off. And little by little, as I started living into this thing, the walls come down and the impossibility started to come in, and I got a lot of breaks. And I started to take advantage of those breaks and live into those breaks. And I reconciled with my mother after 3 years of sobriety, and she invited me into a business she had got into. It was industry with a large company, and she agreed to bring me in as an assistant, and I went and did that. And the company agreed to hire me despite the fact of my past, despite the fact of no education, not even a GED, despite the fact they had to go to the state of Missouri and write and convince the Department of Insurance that I was eligible to even get into this field. And they did. And I failed the test the first time, passed it the second time. And I started my journey, and I had a great life. And it started to take off for me. Things started to shake, rattle, and roll. My sponsor, Tom, has a great quote. Tom says, when preparation meets opportunity and God does the introduction, amazing things will happen in your life. And it's really the truth. But up until that point, until I really engaged adopted this program as a way of life, I wasn't mature enough to experience or live into the opportunity. So they just passed me by. They just went on by. They just left. And when I started to live into them, it changed my life as I grew up and started to mature here. And so I went on and I had a great career. I got married. This is my wife, Susie. This is a great thing about Zoom. That's Susie. And we got 5 kids. We got 4 girls and 1 boy. You got to be careful what you pray for. I didn't know I could ever fall in love with a little bald-headed woman with no teeth until they handed me one. And so there you go, Dad. So I fell in love with this little bald-headed woman. And now I got 4 of them and 1 more. And the youngest one's 23. They all grown up. And the beautiful part about it, none of them have ever seen me drink alcohol or do anything drastic in my life. It's been a beautiful ride, and they're all educated and they're all living pretty good lives. I have to slap myself all the time. How did that ever happen? But I'm blessed that it happened. I was able to, when I got here, I was in that industry. I got some initials behind my name, but I finally plateaued. I couldn't go any further because I didn't have any education. Sponsor said, well, why don't you go get your GED? It's time. I said, dude, I can't pass the GED test. Let's be real. I quit school when I was 13. I've already tried twice when I was incarcerated. I couldn't pass it. Well, then go sign up for community college. I said, are you kidding me, man? I'm 30-something years old at this time. I'm well over 30 years old. Just go do it. So I sign up for the classes, and I go from work, and I'm dressed in a tie and a suit because that's how I had to wear to work. And I walk into the classroom for the first time. They think I'm the instructor because I already got gray hair. They think I'm the guy teaching the class. No, I had to sit down the front and not look at any of them because when I was a teenager, I took the thumbtack out of my KISS poster and pierced my ear with it. But to wear an earring back in my day, that was a big deal, man. But nowadays, man, these people were tatted out and they got tats everywhere. They got body piercings everywhere. Some of them look like they fell down the nut and bolt section at Lowe's. They got so much going on, it's incredible. They look like they should be in museums or a work of art. And they're all 16, 17-year-olds I'm sitting in this room with, and I couldn't look at any of them. But long story short, I passed the test, and then I eventually walked across the stage a few years later and got a bachelor's degree. Sent my mother a bumper sticker that said, hey, your kid made the honor roll. I'm 30-something years old. That was a big joke in my family for a while. But eventually I walked across the stage and got a master's degree in business, and I wrote my thesis on starting a business from scratch and selling it. Particular business, and I've been able to do that not once, but I've been able to do it twice in my recovery. And eventually I walked across the stage and I got another master's degree. And the impossible becomes possible is what I'm telling you. 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4 here. It's been an amazing ride. What I want to wind up with, I've had an amazing run. I've made some incredible amends. I unfortunately just don't have time to get into all those things that I'd love to tell you about or talk to you about that have been huge blessings in my life. I can tell you for sure I reconciled with my mother, and she went home in 2015, and she was the greatest winner of my life. My mother was a rock star, and everybody in recovery knew her. She wasn't in recovery herself, but she just was one of those moms that was around, and everybody called her Mama Lum. Great winner of my life, but it was a great honor to be asked by all my siblings to give her eulogy and to be the executive of her estate. It's a long way to go when she wouldn't even talk to me when I got here, And so this is a long reconciliation process is what I'm telling you. But what I want to wind up with, so the delusions that I really had to wrestle with, number 1, I'm not alcoholic. Number 2, I am alcoholic, but it's not my fault. Victimization. Had me by the throat. As our 4th step would say, to conclude that others are wrong was about as far as most of us ever got. And so that delusion of victimization did everything but kill me. And the problem with victimization is you can drink yourself to death, and it's not your fault. You can sit inside a 9x7 or 10x7 jail cell for the rest of your life, and it's not your fault. You can blow your nose out. You can blow your lungs out. You can blow your veins out. You can blow your brains out, and it's not your fault. And that's a deadly game, that victimization. I know there's probably people on here tonight that are stuck in that. And the steps are what's going to free you from that. That's what freed me from it. Delusion number 3 is I could come to the rooms and I could tell you I was alcoholic. I could finally own the fact that it wasn't your fault. I had to really own it. But let's just be reality. I've already burned my life into the ground. The mountain's too big a mountain to climb. I broke too many hearts. I burnt too many bridges. There's little hope that my life will ever really change. So why even try? It's impossible. And so that delusion of the impossibility, that delusion of the time has passed you by, is a very powerful delusion. And when that delusion gets into your heart, it creates discouragement. When discouragement gets in your heart, guess what you do? You quit. For most people, they don't even get started. That's why recidivism rates are 60, 70% in our prisons, because people already quit before they ever left. And so that's the power of that delusion, that it's going to be impossible for you ever to come back from where you are. And this delusion, it's not real. That's what I'm telling you. So if you're in that place, trust me, it's not real. But you got to stay here long enough. You got to stay long enough for the miracle to happen, friends. And it will happen if you stay here. Number 4 was spiritual disqualification, that I was spiritually disqualified. Because I would come to the rooms and I'd hear people talk about God, and God sounded like this to me. People would say, I feel the presence of the Spirit. God spoke to me this morning. I heard God through what you shared. I heard God through the devotions this morning. God sounded like this to me. And so my conclusion was I was spiritually disqualified. And the things that I suffered in my life, this must be spiritual condemnation, must be spiritual persecution. It just made sense for me. But as I worked through the steps and I got my tube unclogged, and that's what it was like. It's like, this is my tube to this world of the Spirit, this heavenly realm. And unfortunately, my tube was clogged with resentments and fears and secrets and sex stuff. All this stuff had my tube clogged where I couldn't tap into the world of the Spirit. When I finally screwed the lid off that tube and check out some of those resentments and shared my entire life story with another human being and talked about the things I said I would never talk about, and admitted, confessed the crimes that I committed that I'd never been held accountable for. When I did all that stuff, all of a sudden my tube opened up and the sunlight of Spirit poured in, and it's never left from that day till now. And it's been a beautiful ride, and that's what the steps have given me. So I've been able to overcome those last delusions. But the last delusion, this delusion that there is no real purpose for my life. I mean, I lived a tough life. I lived a horrific life. I mean, there's just no real purpose. Although we talk about purpose all the time today. We talk about our singleness of purpose, our primary purpose, our group purpose, our real purpose. This was just to fit ourselves to be a maximum service to God and the people about us. We talk about purpose all day long, but this delusion in my mind is my life is too fractured, it's too broken, it's too far gone, and my life's never really going to be of value to anybody. Let's just be really serious about it. But what I learned is not true. And as I heal, and as our literature tells us all the way through, that we got to cling to the idea that our dark past becomes the greatest possession that we'll ever possess. And with it, God can do amazing things, including avert misery and death for a lot of other people. And it was through sponsorship that I realized that, and I'll share this as I close. This is the 2 most important things I ever did in my sobriety and continue to do today. Number 1, my sponsor said, Harold, you always have a new guy you're working with. And this started for me in 1990 when I started really working the steps. You always have a new man you're working with. Page 100, first full paragraph, greatest promise in the big book as far as I'm concerned. So always have a new guy. If you don't have a new guy, you stop what you're doing, you get out your rods, you get out your bait, you go fish where there's fish. But you always have a new man you're on this journey with. Number 2, I want you committed to going somewhere once a week where you don't want to end up. And you can pick where that's at. I don't care where it's at, treatment center, halfway house, county jail, whatever. But just be committed to going somewhere once a week where you don't want to end up. And so I stayed committed to those. I stayed true to those, and I have all these years later. And that's what's led to the life I have today. I mean, ultimately, everything points to that. And it's what helped me deal with all my isms, my phobias, but it also is what helped me deal with that delusion that there was no value to my life. I didn't have anybody I could call when I got here. Nobody. I couldn't even call my mother anymore when I got here. Today I got this, which is full of not hundreds, but thousands of contacts of people that are friends, people that I know that I can never do justice with because there's just too many. There's not enough time in the day. But I have a full life today. And I had literally nobody I could call when I got here. And that's a long haul to get from that place to that place. But I'm telling you, it's a beautiful life. And so that's what this thing's about. So that started for me. I went to the Skid Row missions every Thursday night, every Saturday morning for 3 years, from 90 to 93. And in 93, I got a call to ask if I could come into the penitentiary system. I said, you're out of your mind. I said, they're not going to let me come into the penitentiary system and do anything. They said, well, we think you've been off paper long enough. They will. And I said, well, let's pretend for a minute. Let's just pretend they would let me come in. I made a pact a long time ago. I ain't never going on that side of the fence for you, them, or anybody else, ever, the rest of my life. And they laughed and said, well, why don't you run that by your sponsor and call us back? And you know how that went. He said, they'll let you in, you're going. Well, I've been there ever since. They haven't been able to kick me out, and that's 25 years ago. And so that's what I do on a regular basis, is going to and primarily maximum security prison systems is what I've been involved in. And it's made a huge difference in my life. And I could sit here all day and tell you stories that came from that. About 7 years ago, they asked if I would help participate in creating a new documentary for AA called A New Freedom. And so to replace the old Sure Be Sitting in a Cell. So I had the privilege, along with a lot of the guys I sponsor on the inside and several that are on the outside, to do this documentary. And it was a powerful, powerful experience to be able to do that. It's a long way. No, I'm never going there to do that. So I'm just saying it's been a huge transition for my life. But my last minute, I want to share this. And this is really crux of it. On page 152, it's like the audience is talking to the big book, and this is what it says. Do you have a sufficient substitute for King Alcohol? And the book says, yes, but it's vastly more than that. It's a fellowship in Alcoholics Anonymous. And the word fellowship there is not in a noun form, it's in a verb form. So it means we have to participate in our own sobriety. But wherever you're at on your journey, if you really listen to what it's saying, if you come all the way in, sit all the way down, and most importantly, stay here and live into this thing. It goes on to say that if you live this thing out, that the most satisfactory years of your existence lie ahead. You're going to make some lifelong friends, evidence right here on the screen tonight. Your imagination is going to be fired. It's going to be an amazing run. And it's really the truth for anybody here. Where are you going to meet these people? If you live in a rural area, high or low, or an urban area, they're everywhere. Drunks are everywhere. But the beautiful part about it, and I'll conclude this, on page 153, it says this. You're going to get the privilege to walk shoulder to shoulder with other people and help them rediscover life. And friends, I finally realized that I do have tremendous purpose in my life. So the 5 big delusions were nothing more than delusions, but at the point in time in my life, they seemed as real as they're going to ever be. But I'm just telling you, through spiritual mathematics, the impossible does become possible. And I was able to live through those and overcome those delusions in my life. And so the beautiful part about that statement is you're going to get to walk shoulder to shoulder with these other people, and you're going to finally know what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. And that shift that happens, that shift at 18 inches from our head to our heart, when we really go from being a taker to a giver, is something you don't ever want to miss. But you got to stay here and you got to live into this thing one day at a time. So we love God, we love others, and we transform the world. It's a beautiful way to live. It's transformed my life. I owe my life to you guys. That's all I got. Thank you for letting me share.